Yes, please.
I don't know if this camera is rolling. Okay, we're going to guess that it is. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started then, and we're going to be very informal. They said you can set up your PowerPoint and everything. It's like, no, I'm going vintage. If you don't know me, my name is Mark Mule Willis, and people think I got the nickname Mule because of my blazing speed, but it's really because I've had to carry the clodbusters on my back for decades, like a good paddle.
Should we get up and walk out?
I'll tell you actually how I got the nickname a little later. But what I want to do is just give you some history of baseball in Dayton, minor league teams, and some of the famous players from Dayton. There's a lot of Dayton history, so hopefully you like it, and then we're going to let Nate make up things about the Clodbusters that will make him sound better and happy. So, anyway, so the first game first mention of baseball in Dayton that I can find was a team called the Dayton Baseball Club. We're very, very creative here in Dayton. And they played the 1869-1870 Reds, so they had that big winning streak. We helped them. So the Dayton Club was really happy because they held them to 6 runs in the first inning. This would have been here in Dayton in May of 1870. But the defense didn't quite work and ended up losing the game 104-9. So it's kind of like some of our early games, right? So then there were a number of minor league teams. There were the Dayton Gyms, the Gym Cities. There was also the Dayton Reds, the Old Soldiers, the Vets. If you didn't know, we have a lot of teams named Vets because we have the Veterans Home here in Dayton. Are you all familiar with that? So it was one of 3 facilities after the Civil War that Lincoln commissioned. And this place was for old soldiers to recover physically and mentally. It was really, really elaborate at the time. They had waterfalls, rock gardens, beautiful landscaping, even a zoo. My favorite thing they had is an actual pond that they kept heated. So it was water with live alligators in it all year long. Why you want live alligators with traumatized amputees never made sense to me. But for some reason, someone thought that was a good idea. But it was really an important part of Dayton. And so we have several teams that were the Old Soldiers, the Vets, Veterans, so named after one of the things that the city was famous for before that darn airplane. And then after that, we did have the Dayton Aviators. But I want to mention a couple of the teams that I thought were especially interesting. And one of them is the Dayton Marcos. So this was one of the original 8 teams in the Negro Leagues when Rube Foster started the league. There were 8 teams, including Kansas City Monarchs, Indianapolis, Chicago American Giants. So we were one of those first teams. Now the club had been around for about 10 years as an amateur club, recreational club. And back then, while they were an all-black team, they played against white teams. So nobody was integrated, but they did play each other. And they had actually done very well as this. And then they started playing in the actual Negro Leagues. They were owned, we talk about how teams promote things now. We have all of our got the Great American Ballpark, Wrigley. It's always named after some company. Well, the Marcos were named after the owner's hotel, the Dayton Marcos Hotel. So he was using the team to promote his club. And they were actually there to be entertainment at the first black amusement park built in the United States. It was here in Dayton. So they had great history. So they were in the league for a year or so. They went to Columbus and they died. They went defunct. They were the Columbus Buckeyes for a year. Did you know that? I didn't know that.
I knew about the Buckeyes.
Yeah, but that only lasted about a year. Then they reformed in 1926.
You say they became the Buckeyes?
They were the Buckeyes for a year.
Okay.
And then they came back as the Marcos again in Dayton. So the teams back then really struggled. They always had trouble financially, and they were going in and out all the time. They ended up back in the Negro Leagues in 1926, finished second to last. And then they stayed until 1930. when they were defunct. The story, and they became an amateur team for a while again. The story is that their owner fell asleep at the owner's winter meeting, and people bought all of the players. And when he woke up, his team was gone. So you better stay awake, or we'll buy your car or something. Yeah, I don't know if that's true, but I read this story. They had a couple players of note. I'll just mention one is Bill Sloan. Now, Bill Sloan wasn't noted as a player, but he was with them, and during the 1913 flood, they had a devastating flood. He went and got a boat and rescued people. They said he rescued 318 people. I don't know how they got the exact number, but it cracked me up just because baseball loves statistics, even at how many lives we saved, right? So Bill Sloan was known for that. But they had another player who I knew the name, but I did not know he had any connection to Dayton, and that's Ray Brown. So Ray Brown is a pitcher who's now in the Hall of Fame for his work with the Negro Leagues. And he played for a season with the Dayton Marcos. He was born in Northern Ohio, moved down here to live with family, and worked in a Sunshine Biscuit company. By the way, Sunshine Biscuit is where Cheez-Its were invented. Yes, they were invented right here in Dayton. So Ray Brown worked there. Someone invited him to play with the Marcos. He was a strong pitcher, also an outfielder, had the best curveball in Negro Leagues. Even as an amateur, they beat the Ohio State amateur team, Dayton Warriors, who won the state championship. They beat them 10-1 with him pitching. So they were a very, very good team, and especially did well competing against white teams. So he ended up at the Pittsburgh Homestead Grays. So he was playing with Buck Leonard, Judd Wilson, double duty Radcliffe, and then across Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was maybe the epicenter of Negro League baseball for a while because they had the Crawfords at the same time with Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, all of them. So it was one of the epicenters. So Ray Brown was in the middle of all of this. He also found one way to guarantee his longevity with the team. He actually married the owner's daughter. They were owned by Composey, and he married Ethel. The rumor is they got married at home plate. We're not sure if that's true. We actually had a wedding at one of our games too. So.
Really?
Yeah, Jim Wilson.
Park or what?
No, remember, were you there for Jim's wedding? Yeah, both of them lasted about as long. But not Jim's out here. He laughed if he was.
This isn't being recorded or nothing, so it's okay.
Oh God, is it? Anyway, so he then played, after the Negro Leagues were breaking up, he played in Cuba, played in Canada, Mexico, played in Mexico's Outlaw League, which kept him from playing pro ball in America after that. Then he came back to Dayton and he worked back at the Sunshine Biscuit Company for a while. Interestingly, when he died in 1965, he had an obit, talked about where he worked, nothing at all mentioned about him playing baseball at all. So he was that unknown here in Dayton. And I don't know if it was because the Marcos weren't well known, he as an individual kept it quiet, but was not recognized for decades later. When he got in the Hall of Fame, Tom Archdeacon wrote a few columns about him, and actually we had people from Dayton finally pitched in and got a marker for his grave a few years after he was put in the Hall of Fame. But he's really one of the best pitchers. He led the Negro League in wins 6-7 times. He's an excellent pitcher and really one of the best pitchers. And to me it's amazing that he is not recognized at all in his Calgary live.
Where's he buried?
I have that someplace. I'll have to check and let you know, but I do have it.
No, you're back here.
But he is here in Dayton. And then the other minor league team I want to mention is the Dayton Ducks. The Dayton Ducks they played in North Dayton in the 30s up to early 40. They had a couple of players that were pretty well known that once they got to the majors. They had Johnny Vandermeer. Anybody know what he's famous for?
Yeah, double no hitter.
Yeah. And then Frank McCormick was a good player with the Reds. He played, he was a 9-time All-Star, played with their World Series team in 1945. But the real star was Ducky Holmes. So the team was named after the manager, Ducky Holmes. Ducky had one of those great baseball careers. I love baseball careers like this. 9 games with St. Louis in 1906. Was a catcher, lusty 185 batting average, which actually would be pretty good today, some of the batting averages. But he bounced around in the minor leagues, managed a little bit after that, and then he was an umpire. Now, as an umpire, he really struggled because he's always getting in fights. There was one time when he made a controversial call. People threw trash at him. He was really mad. On the way out, picked a fight with the fan, beat up the fan. Well, the fan happened to be a retired veteran in uniform. So all of the veteran games went to Kenshaw Landis wanting to get him banned. He ended up having to pay a fine, but he stayed in. He later was umping in the American League, and one of the last games of the season, 1931 I think, he threw out George Sisler, who was manager at the time, Pat Collins, and a coach. Well, the team was furious. This time, Ducky got punched out by a fan afterwards. The fan ended up paying the fine. But the Browns owner was so mad that he swore that Holmes would never manage again or ump again. And so he was out of the league. Then he came back to Dayton. He actually bought a Dayton team that was called the Dayton Wings, and it became the Dayton Ducks. Their uniforms were great. I should have had a picture, but they actually had a little cartoon duck on them. I can't imagine being serious trying to play with a cartoon duck on you, but that's what they did. So he still was an eccentric character. He kept getting in fights. At one point, he punched an umpire, was suspended for 3 months. That didn't keep him from managing. He actually sat on an electrical tower at an outfield and managed by signals. He also, at one point during a playoff game, maybe it was for luck, I'm not sure, but a fan gifted him with a live duck. And so they kept the duck in the dugout. In the 7th inning, none of his players had reached first. So he took the duck, put it on first base, saying at least now we've got one Dayton duck on first base. And as far as I know, it's the first case of a live duck being thrown out of a baseball game because the duck was thrown out of the game.
Just curious, you know, where'd you get all this information about this one guy? I mean,
Some of it was interesting on this guy. Some of this was a saber thing. So I worked at Dayton Library for a long time, and we did a research project, and I was hoping they still had it. I went to the library, nobody can find it. But we talked about baseball in the 1920s and 30s at Old North Field, and that's where they played. So I knew to look for him. So I knew enough, and I found a wonderful saber biography, but it was really interesting because there were at least 3 players named Ducky Holmes, and 2 of them at least umpired. So part of the whole saber story is trying to untangle which Holmes is which. Sometimes a newspaper would just refer to him as umpire Holmes, and at least 2 of them had umped, and they're not quite sure which Holmes it was. So some of it was through saber, some of my background that I had years ago. Anyway, he retired. The team kind of ended when World War II started. He stayed active for a couple more years and died from a couple of strokes, and is buried at Calvary Cemetery. I know where he's buried. Well, I thought it was interesting because they moved him. I don't know why.
there's a whole committee on saber that they try to find all the graves of former major league players.
Yeah.
I think I was convinced in the last talk to join Sabre.
Oh yeah, you should. Yeah, you should. It's great. Their publications are wonderful. And it's funny because they're always known for their statistics, but if you read their biographies of players, they're wonderful biographies of players. They tell you a lot about them. Anyway, so the other thing that came out about that time, so Old North Field was also where we had barnstorming games. So in 27 and 28, there was Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig did barnstorming, and they played here in Dayton. They called them the Busting Babes versus the Larpicking Lou's. And I talked to a guy who went to one of those games when we did this baseball thing, old guy of course, and he had a baseball that was signed by Babe Ruth. Now it was interesting because he talked about going to the Biltmore Hotel, which is now a senior center here in Dayton, and waiting for Ruth to come out to get an autograph. So Ruth came out, the little kid took his ball up, asked for the autograph. Ruth was kind, signed it. Beautiful signature. I saw the ball. But then Leo Drosha was with Ruth, and Drosha said, "I'll sign the ball for you too, kid." He didn't want Drosha to sign. He just wanted Ruth, but he said, "I didn't know how to tell him no." So on the back, it's got Leo Drosha. So I think it's kind of cool. But I talked to him. I was like, "Dude, I'll buy that from you. If you wanted for some reason to give the ball to Mike Smith." I said, Mike Smith can buy his own baseballs. But anyway, so he never did sell the ball. But the barnstorming was really popular here. And Ruth actually made sure that they had balls here that traveled far. He said, I played someplace, I think it was in Columbus, they were barnstorming, and he was unhappy with the balls. He called them 50-cent balls. So he made sure that they used a higher quality, harder ball, and he hit a record home run here, farther than anyone hit in, I think it was 27 exhibition game. So those kind of things, they were great fun for the fans. They usually would just have those two players, and then they filled in with local teams. So they just traveled with the two of them. So that's the Dayton Ducks.
How did they do the barnstorming though? I mean, you have the 27 Yankees are like
Yeah.
one of the most famous teams in all Major League, and how would they take time off from the?
It was off season.
Oh, it was off season.
Off season. Yeah. No, Ruth was a famous barnstormer. He did lots for years. It's kind of funny because he didn't need the money. I think he needed the attention. There's always stories about Ruth when they cleaned up his locker at the end of the season, because he never cleaned it up. There would be uncashed checks for hundreds and thousands of dollars. So it wasn't so much of the money. I think he liked the attention. I think he liked the fun. They didn't have anything else to do. So, but it would just be like those two that would go in the off season. Now some of the other ones would do others, but we had just the two here in Dayton. So awesome. Then there were a couple teams. There was another Dayton team after the war ended. They were the Dayton Indians for a couple of years, and they ended about 1951. Then we had a long drought of minor league baseball until we had the Dayton Dragons. So have you all been to the Dragons field? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I don't know if you remember, but there was a real struggle to get the team here. A lot of folks thought we could not support a team. We didn't want a stadium built downtown. No one would come downtown. And after a lot of struggle, they finally got the money, built the stadium. I went to the opening game. Anybody else go to the opening game? That was great. It was a real exciting moment for Dayton because it took so long to come to fruition, and really a lot of us thought it wouldn't happen. So the place was packed, it was lively, it was great fun. Am I running out of time now?
No, you're fine.
Okay. They ended up selling out that game. They ended up setting a record for minor league attendance that year, 581,000. They broke it a couple of other times, and they now have the record for minor league attendance for an A team. They've had that since, 2010. They also now have the record for longest consecutive sellout of any professional team. They beat the Portland Trail Blazers record. Now this year they are struggling a little bit though. I saw that they are trying to get people to buy season tickets, so they're not sold out yet. I did actually, when I saw that send in, it's like, well, maybe I'll buy a partial season ticket again. I have to see if I can get really good seats. They have had 131 players go to the majors. So I was really amazed that there's that many. And some of them include Adam Dunn. I remember watching Adam Dunn, to me, the reincarnation of David Kingman. He is the same thing. He could hit home runs, couldn't field, couldn't hit singles. He's the same player after 10 years in the majors as he was with the Dragons. I didn't see him change at all. I remember watching him. He could hit home runs, but he couldn't do anything else. But they had a lot of that. Joey Votto, Billy Hamilton, Todd Frazier, Homer Bailey, Jay Bruce, Cueto, all played here. So it's a great place to see future play. But the Dragons had really made their reputation on entertainment. The executives say, we can't really control winning or losing because they don't know what players they're getting, how long. So they focus on lots of entertainment, and also the stadium still looks brand new. You know, it's funny, you go in, it does not feel 22 years old. They really focus on keeping the place beautiful and having great entertainment. So found about a couple of other Daytonians that played Major League Baseball. So I'll mention a few of these. So Mike Smith is from Dayton. I think most folks know that. Roger Clemens was born here, lived here for a couple of years. One year they were both MVPs, one in one league, one in the other. So Dayton had MVPs in 1986 in both leagues, which is pretty decent for a piddly little town, I thought. And arguably, you know, the best, well, clearly the best third baseman of all time, and one of the best pitchers of all time came from Dayton. So there, take that, big cities. Steve Yeager played here. He played high school. He wasn't born here. Played high school ball here. Chris Chambliss was from Dayton, which I didn't know. And Don Clendenin, anybody remember him?
Yeah.
So World Series MVP with the '69 Mets. Moved here and was an attorney here for a while. I was actually working as a paralegal and worked in a law firm. A lot of folks I know met him, and I never got to meet him, but they'd always come back and say, Don Clendenin let me wear his World Series ring. So he worked here. I don't know how he ended up practicing law in Dayton, but he ended up spending years and years in
He played in
Dayton.
Columbus.
Hmm?
He played in Columbus.
Oh, okay.
They were the Columbus Jets.
Mm.
So it was a Pirates farm team.
In the minors.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I wonder if that's part of why he came back here. I'm not sure. But after baseball, he got his law degree and then had a law firm here for a number of years. And there was a guy here named Clyde Ingle. Anybody ever hear of Clyde Ingle? He's sort of Mookie Wilson of his time. You know, Mookie Wilson, besides being a moderate ball player, is famous. He's the one who hit the ball to Bill Buckner, that Buckner booted to lose the World Series. 1912 World Series, one of the most famous World Series of all time, one of the closest, went 8 games. Christy Mathewson with the Giants, Smokey Joe Wood with the Boston Red Sox. All of the games were 1 or 2 runs decided. Came down to actually game 8. One game got called out 6-6, tied, got called because of darkness. So went into game 8. Christy Mathewson pitching against Joe Wood, classic matchup. Goes into 10 innings, okay? Giants take the lead, top of the 10th. So the Boston's down by 1. They send our Daytonian, Clyde Ingle, who had played every position except pitcher and catcher in his career, but never played any of them well, was just one of those utility players. He goes in to pinch hit. He lofts a fly ball to center field, easy first out, except Fred Snodgrass drops it. Fred Snodgrass is now famous. It's called the $30,000 muff because that's what it cost him. So Ingle gets the second, scores on Tris Speaker's single to tie the game, walk in a sacrifice later, and they lose the game. Red Sox win. It was Clyde Ingle's hit that started the whole thing. Actually, it's Snodgrass's error. If you ever, any of you ever hear Glory of Their Time or read the book? Okay, greatest baseball book ever. So after Ty Cobb died in the early 60s, Lawrence Ritter got in his car, drove around with a tape recorder, and interviewed old ball players from that dead ball era. And one of them is Fred Snodgrass, and he talks some about that era. And he was known for that. He actually, it really made it tough for him. His obit, he had a great life, great career. His obit said, Fred Snodgrass dropped fly ball, dead at 85. So decades later, it still haunted him. In Glory of the Times, he talks about a couple years later, getting on first base. The pitcher was mad at him for some reason, throws the ball in the air from the mound, tries to catch it, drops it, and makes fun of him, and the fans all start hooting and hollering. So he was always famous for that. But it was our Daytonian, Clyde Ingle, who started that whole thing. So poor Fred, he was always...
You know, the Glory of Their Times, if you can still find one, I found a copy of the CD version of it in the library. And
You
it's
can
interesting to
actually
hear the interview.
A lot of it's on YouTube. I listened to Fred Snodgrass last night on the way. I was writing some of this on the way home. I listened to some interview with him. So yeah, if you just look up Glory of Their Time, and it is great to hear them tell their stories. It's actually, I think it's the best baseball book ever written. Certainly my favorite. Gives a lot of good stories. So now let's talk about real baseball. Vintage baseball in Dayton. So there was another Dayton Ducks team, and that's why I started. In about 1990, the Dayton History Society decided to start a vintage baseball team. I knew somebody worked there. She knew I was a baseball fan, so I played on the team. We were really, really bad. We played the Clodbusters a number of times. I think we came in third. We were so bad. One of the things I remember about the team is we had a catcher, and he just one game seemed really, really uncomfortable. I said, "You okay?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm just passing a kidney stone." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, but my doctor said it was okay to play. It might help me." So our catcher was passing a kidney stone in a game. I do remember we went up to play the Muffins, and they had uniforms for visitors. We didn't really have uniforms. We had like jeans and a t-shirt or something. So we got to wear uniforms for that one game. It was really exciting for us. It was a big moment. So the Muffins were really supportive. After the team decided not to renew, I went to the Clodbusters, and I played with them, and I said, "Well, we already have a mule." They did. They had another player named Mule. And but they said, "Well, maybe you can practice with us, maybe get into a game." It's like, so I got managed to get in a few games. But my first at-bat with the Ducks, I'm walking to the plate, and they said, "You have to have a nickname. It should be some sort of animal nickname." And I'm literally carrying my bat walking up, and so I just said Mule, because I like Mark Mule alliteration. So that's actually how I ended up with the Mule nickname. It was back in my Ducks day. So the Clodbusters started, so Jim Wilson gave us some information about the start of the Clodbusters. They started about 89 or 90. There was an exhibit at Carriage Hill, the Living History Farm, about old-time baseball. And Scott Plowboy Treon worked there, and he got Jim in. They saw it. They ended up playing with the Muffins a few times, and they really liked it. And they wanted they said the Muffins tried to recruit them, but they decided they wanted to start a team there. And for Carriage Hill, it was a great idea. It was a wonderful place to play because it's so authentic. You saw some games there. Yeah, did you ever see games at Carriage Hill? No. So it was really back in a corner. It really looked very vintage. There was a little tobacco plot nearby, barbed wire fence for the horses. They had horses and cows on there. Before a game, we would go out with shovels and clean the horse poop up. And other teams still talk about how brave you have to be to reach down and pick up something brown and round and throw it. So, it was really one of the most vintage places to play ever. And we ended up losing it because they wanted to expand their tobacco field. And we probably plowed into some of it pretty frequently. So Jim Wilson really and Scott helped to start the team. Jim's stepdad, Rain Barrel, was the coach, and they gathered enough team. Stonewall was our shortstop and became the captain of the team for a number of years, and then Scott captained the team. And they said that Jim says their biggest, fondest memory from the first couple of years is when they finally beat the Muffins. So that was their goal. And I'll mention Scott real quickly. So Scott was our captain for many years, and good player, shortstop, strong arm. He did not make any distinction between throwing to first and throwing to second. So if you were in second, you had to be really brave because Scott would break your fingers. Good hitter, good player, good captain. And then he passed away a couple years ago. And so we now name our honors after the Plowboy Player of the Year. So we still try to keep his memory alive. I stay in touch with Renee's wife and the kids all the time.
What's Scott's last name?
Treon. Yeah. It's so funny because I have so much trouble remembering people's names because I only know nicknames. I actually ran into somebody from Tip City once at an event that was like a real work thing. And we knew each other, but we had no idea our real names. So anyway, I'm going to let Nate talk a little bit about the glory times, the ups and downs of the Clodbusters.
The glory days.
And what was the Plowboy winner last year?
Yeah.
With non-Clodbuster in the room.
Not that you don't all know me, but
Oh.
for those watching at home and on YouTube, my My name is Nate Frenchie Buckner. There we go. We got to work on that. I started with the club back in 1995, so this was my 28th, 29th season, whatever you want to say. I came into it because there was the catcher at the time. We called him behind. We were still in that antiquated, pitcher or behind hurler kind of nomenclature. But the catcher at the time was his wife was friends with my wife, and I was into softball at the time, but I was not liking softball at the time because it was getting way overly competitive. Even church leagues were getting way overly competitive. And he's like, "Hey, you like playing ball? Why don't you come on out and try this gentlemanly sport?" And I'm like, "What? Tell me a little more about it." "Well, we don't use gloves." I'm like, "Oh, come on." I relented, donned some blue jeans, a white t-shirt, went on out, and I immediately fell in love with the game. It was the well-struck ball, and everything that we take. I don't want to say take for granted, but everything that we do in the gentlemanly nature of this game, just sucked me right in, and here I am today. I can't get out just yet.
We're trying.
I'm trying, but it keeps pulling me back. So that's in '95. So that was probably like June or July of '95. So it wasn't a full season. Come into the next season, I'm again playing with the team. I still don't have a nickname. I ended up having to go to we have this game on a Sunday. And about 3 o'clock, I go, "Hey, I gotta get going. I got a flight to France, and I gotta leave." So again, come back. Again, most of the season goes through, and like, this guy still doesn't have a nickname. I was like, "Well, he went to France. Let's call him Frenchie." I'm like, but it stuck. It has nothing to do with any kind of sexual prowess. For you watching. It was just because I went to France. Mules on the team. We had a bunch of different guys, a bunch of all levels and abilities at that point in time. My brother, he's 6 years younger than me. He was just graduating high school, and he was going into college. And I was like, "Hey, I'm playing this vintage baseball game. You guys want to think about coming on out?" And he's like, "Eh." So he came on out, and he started loving it, and we got one of his friends involved, and so we just started putting this team together. So we had Tomahawk, we had Jim Wilson, we had Plowboy, we had myself, we had my brother, we had this guy named Polecat. So we had 5 really solid players, at the time, especially us being quite young. And we really just started gelling together, I think, and we bring in guys, but the one thing that we would do is we would just try to keep everybody at a position so that you knew exactly where you were playing all the time. I mean, outfielders you would kind of play, and it's kind of why, being the captain for the club, I try to keep people in positions where they can get comfortable with those positions. We don't want a Clyde that's going to go around every single position. We want okay. I'm not saying that not everybody can play that, but just to stay comfortable. Your outfielders are comfortable in the outfield. Your infielders are comfortable in the infield, and we definitely had that. We were putting together some pretty a pretty powerful team, especially for in vintage baseball. And what were the Yankees called back in the day? Murderers Row. Murderers Row. Yeah, we may have been part of that as well. We didn't have a very good reputation for letting up. I will say that Plowboy, if we were up by 10 or 15 or 20 runs or something, he's like, "Hey, let's just go base to base." And again, not trying to overly humiliate teams, but sometimes even the best pop up that you think somebody's just going to go ahead and catch or get on the first bound has a way of getting away from them, and it's like, we're trying here, but so again, probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, we were a really, really, really good team. You know, here's the ups. And we were invited up to, in 2003, we were invited, the very first historic tournament of baseball was up at Greenfield Village. And we went on up there. Of course, they're playing by 1869 rules. Fly game, most of the time we were playing bound game. Everything in Dayton, in Ohio, Indiana areas was all bound. They were starting to expand fly game up in Michigan, even out east. They were experimenting with 65 to 69 rules, or even beyond. I mean, we'd even taken some trips out to Long Island. We'd been out there, Old Bethpage, and that was just a great experience to go on out there and see what a different, you know, what different guys are doing with the vintage game. We went down to Natchez, Mississippi. We were invited down there a couple times. But, you know, so here we are, we're at the World Tournament of Baseball. We've got this group of guys that you wouldn't necessarily think are a powerhouse team, but somehow we put it together. The first game, we ended up winning pretty handily. And I think it was like a triple. Well, you had 2 games, and then you went into the final, or the semifinals and the finals. So we won our first 2 games. I didn't think we were kind of weird on the rules, because they were like unlimited stealing. So we did the very first game unlimited stealing, and of course we had plenty of fast players on our team. So as soon as you got a single, 2 or 3 pitches later, you're on third, and it's just like, this might be the way that the game was played and the tournament was played, but this really isn't a whole lot of fun. So the second game, we even asked the other team, we're like, do you guys want to do this? Because we're okay with just basically stealing on the muff like what we would typically do, and again, knowing it's not historic, but just to make the game a little bit more fun. And they were like, oh no, we want to go ahead and do it. And like, we ended up batting through the order 2 whole times in that game. And then again, we just scored like 18 runs in 1 inning, and we're like, I don't know about this. But then we go on to the semifinals, and that was, I think that was against the Lottie Dawes, and that was a very, very well played game. And we got to the end of that game. I believe I was at the plate. I'm not trying to add to the legend of Frenchie here, but I believe I was up, and we were down by a run or 2 runs, and I put a nice shot into right center field, and my brother hates to hear me say that it was a shot heard around the world, but it kind of was. It led us into the next game, and we played the Bay City Independence. And looking at the stat sheet on that game, it was just amazing that most everybody on our squad, whether you're like 7 for 9 or 8 for 9 or 9 for 9, I mean, there wasn't anybody on the team that didn't have like at least 5 or 6 hits. But I think the score ended like 45 to 26 or something like that. It was a very high scoring affair. So just since this is 20 years later and we're celebrating 20 years, this is the group of gentlemen. And again, it's a motley assortment crew here. We have some young guys. I mean, we're all young in this photo. I mean, even Mule's only 40 years old. So he was the old guy on our squad, and even though we always say don't smile in the photos, it is really hard in this photo to not smile. So this was that photo there. So then
the championship game, Ernie Harwell, the Hall of Fame announcer, called the game. So there's something cool about coming up to bat and then hearing his familiar voice call your name.
Right.
That was fun.
So the next couple of years at that World Tournament, I think the next year Mother Nature kind of got rained out. We were heading into the semifinals, but we couldn't finish that year. The next 2 years we won the tournament as well, and then things kind of went south. We can say that maybe it was stacked against us, or maybe it wasn't, but I don't want to point fingers or start accusations. But we, after three of the first 4 years, then that was what we did. After that, I would say we left Carriage Hill Farm in 2000, like Neil was saying, we got let go from there because we were cutting down the tobacco farm. But so we moved down to Carillon Park, which is where we'll be playing today. And it was in 2008. We had some turnover. There was a couple times where we weren't really sure of a couple. So I think there was a season maybe back in 2012 or 2013 where my brother quit playing. A couple other guys were like, yeah, I'm kind of done too. And John Everett, who was our club manager before Adam, he and I were both just talking, and we're like, if we can't turn this around in at least a year or so, then we're going to be done, which would have really been a disservice to the great history that the Clubbusters had. But here we are, we're surviving. We've got probably more than 15, 20 members. We're not hurting for players. I know that there are a lot of teams out there that are struggling. Some teams even in our area have combined to be able to continue to play together, but we're still going strong. The efforts that we put out to get players have been fruitful. I don't know. Question?
I've got a question. How did you come up with the uniform that you got?
The uniform. So
Yeah.
being that we started at Carriage Hill Farm, and it was the Arnolds were semi-Amish, I think. They just based it off of what
You say Amish?
Amish.
Okay.
Yeah, this is based off of like 1840s, 1850s in Amish.
Both the name and the uniform, it's kind of that old farm heritage.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, we have no zippers, which means
Thanks for sharing.
you're welcome.
Zippers were invented until after the 36.
When are we doing a t-shirt order for us new guys that don't have something fine?
Oh wait, we gotta wait. We have to wait. Questions pertaining to Dayton. Not Clubbuster Club specific, but anything. It's hard not to come back every season, and it's just something I've done for almost 30 years now, and my body keeps telling me maybe you need to slow down a little bit, but keep on going strong.
Yeah. I'm 66. I plan on playing at least another 5 years.
We don't know if we're going to have you play.
Well, I didn't say that.
See him on the field sliding down, getting on his knees
Yeah.
for balls.
I know.
Yeah, you
We're
see
not
that?
on it. We're not gonna allow that play to happen.
Exactly.
Well, I got a grandson who's 10, and he's playing on select baseball. He wants to play on the Clodbusters, so I figured, what was 12, 13 when Hatchet started playing, so if I can
Yeah.
play, I want to have him, my son, and grandson out there and do
That
3
would be
generations.
cool. That would be cool.
That'll be cool.
I remember when the Reapers had three generations playing on their team at one time. It was neat. Thank you guys.
The history of baseball and Dayton. There we go. That's a wrap.
I love that picture.
By the way, you were talking about kind of made your day that you finally beat the Muffins.
Yeah.
Well, there was a time when we finally beat the Clodbusters. I don't know. I think it was at Carriage Hill. Carriage Hill, is that what it was?
Yep.
Yeah.
We had a team that we didn't think was very good, and that day everything went right. And we finally beat you guys after you'd beaten us several years in a row.
We weren't happy that day.
Huh? You remember that?
No, I said that we weren't happy that day.
No. Yeah.
I was gonna say, now is the new golden era of the Clodbusters with the players you have here.
It is. That's what I meant to
All-star
say.
team right here.
Until we play like the Akron team was up
Well, it really has rebuilt, but we've always kept the spirit that, we'd rather, we always want to win, but we always want to play as gentlemen. And I think we've always kept that spirit. The players have changed and things
That's
like
why
that.
we schedule you guys every year. I mean, you're one of our favorite teams to play.
The whole idea
You're
of
gentlemen, they play.
the whole idea of the meal that so many teams don't do, we've kept that tradition. And And I remember talking to a few players that were like, when they started and they get on another teammate or the other team, it's like, that's not clodbuster baseball. And a few kind of learned and a few left. But if you don't play that style, I don't care what you do on the field.
Sure.
You gotta have the right attitude.
Appreciate that it's not bro league.
No, we don't want the killer softball,
Yeah.
church softball league.
I don't know who in here has not made a mistake on the field, but
Yeah.
we all make mistakes on the. Oh. Are you talking about practice last week, or are you talking about, what are you talking about?
No.
It's all planned.
There-
Every ball he drops.
Every ball you drop is
Yeah,
planned?
it's all planned.
Oh, okay. No, I know.
I want you to allow me to be that mediocre all-around player that I can be.
And we have.
That's why you haven't been thrown off.
We've embraced your mediocrity.
I'm staying here for the next session, so.
What's the next session?
Media, something like that. What's it called officially? How to Connect with the Media and Communities by Bill Helm.
I need to do that. I did a TV show for us last season.
Did you?
And I talked to the guy again, he's hopefully good, so I sent him the schedule recently, I'm trying to get him out, so.
Yeah, you're gonna be our media person, you'll.
Yeah, I've done media for decades.
Yo, which one is it? I gotta put that one in.
That one, yeah, that one. This one, so there's a new line lately.
What year is this? Oh,
I think it's like this, like,
There's Jim, right here.
Yeah.
And this is gonna be.
oh, well, that is the league, that's interesting.
This guy was just called Artis.
What I saw in their uniforms
And then this one was Ditch Digger, he was our catcher.
looked a little more
That's kinda
cartoony,
right
yeah.
there. Whole cat.
I
This is
actually-
him.
I've actually
is
seen,
he still umpiring?
actually tried
Yeah,
to
he's
see,
still
I
up
read
there.
the photo was in a newspaper article. I'll send it to
Weasel
you.
and, you know.
You can get David
Those are
Marlowe
almost there.
shirts at the mall now.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
all the things.
We're reaching back.
Yeah,
More toward
I
this.
think it's kind of cool.
Was this the first ever World Series? Because I think we were there for that.
Yeah.
We probably didn't do well, but I think we
Well,
were.
it's some
Heck,
cool,
that's
it
the only
has
time we
decent
went.
history. I think one of the things I
I can't
learned
remember who the first game was
working in the
against, but the
library
second
for
game
years
was
was
against Forest
things
City.
about our history was sort of interest. I like about the,
And then the second game.
I like about the
Semi-final
veterans
game.
and things like
Where
that.
that was.
Yeah,
No, thanks.
yeah, it was fun. It was fun research.
I know we were.
So I had
I had no idea.
I
how
used
we
to
did.
see the library a lot, got to be friends with, and he was
Oh,
writing
thanks.
a
Thanks
book
for doing
on.
this.
Hey, yeah.
We would sit down and just read newspaper articles on microfilm for months, and I'd chat with him. And he came to a few Clodbuster games, and I tried to reach him with this.
That's my presentation.
The
Oh,
CCS
okay.
commission.
No, I'm
We
not
got
paying
hold of
member,
him.
so I'm gonna.
He's
I got
96,
some other
living in
things
a
to do.
nursing home.
All right.
He didn't finish his book, but he's got stuff for me, so I said, okay, I'll come by and pick it up. But then I didn't hear back, so, 96, I'm not sure. But he did email me once quickly, so I'm still hoping to.
That'd be awesome if you could pick up that project in some way.
Yeah,
right?
I've done a lot of writing, so I don't mind doing the writing part of it if he's, but I'm not gonna sit there and read microfiche for days. So,
That makes it a certain type of brain.
yeah,